a lot of people mistakenly think that we should be back on a gold standard. And you see this everywhere, especially with the Bitcoiners, and they have to have this story to make sure people keep buying their assets, because the only way both of those go up in value is if more people buy them. If Warren Buffett owns $380 billion of US Treasury bonds, I'm fairly sure the US dollar is not going anywhere. And Warren Buffett's the greatest money manager of all time. So if he's buying treasury bonds, I'm fairly certain he knows that it's going to continue to be the reserve currency. The US economy grew from producing 300 billion a year in GDP to something like $1 trillion. And so it tripled in value. And the only way that was possible was... I'm Lloyd James Ross, 7-figure investor and entrepreneur, and I've helped thousands of business owners and professionals turn financial stress into success. If you're stuck in old money habits, overwhelmed by investing, or unsure where to start, this is for you. I'll give you the mindset and strategies to take control, grow your wealth, and achieve financial freedom. It's time to make your money work for you. China is coming for the US dollar. Here's their plan. This all started back in about 2022 when the United States made a fatal error with weaponizing the US dollar. And what had happened is, of course, Russia had invaded Ukraine, and to effectively help Ukraine and fight this global war, the United States, rather than sending in, military equipment, although they did do that in the end, and troops, etc., and starting another global conflict, they decided to actually set sanctions against Russia for making this decision to go and invade Ukraine. And what they decided to do was they decided to freeze $600 billion of US treasuries that Russia owned. And that was the fatal mistake, because by doing that, they actually said to the world, hey, your assets that you own that are US Treasury bonds, you actually don't own them. Turns out you think you own them, but now you don't, because we just froze them. And it really took Russia out of the SWIFT payments system. It really just cut off the supply of US dollars. And so by taking that one step under the Biden administration, they started this endeavor by other countries to de-dollarize the world and start to use other currencies other than the US dollar. Because they realized, well, if they can do it to Russia, one of the world's leading superpowers, who else can they do it to? And so China's obviously seeing this and going, I see this playing out. If we do certain things, the US can all of a sudden say, hey, we're going to seize your assets. That doesn't create a lot of trust in US treasuries. And US treasuries are like the lifeblood of the global economy, because they enable people to do business and trade in US dollars. And that's why the USD has been and still is the dominant force or currency in global trade, right? In fact, 60% of all global trade is done in US dollars. And that it has tremendous network effects in the world, because a lot of countries like China, Japan, in fact, Japan owns $1.1 trillion worth of US treasuries. A lot of countries own US treasury bonds because they're the world reserve currency, reserve asset. They're the risk-free asset. And it's backed by the United States. So you can't default on it, right? Because if they needed to pay it back, they just print money, because they actually own the world reserve currency. So anyway, getting back to it, China sees Russian treasury bonds frozen. And so they're like, well, we don't want this. So what are we going to do? And so they decided to, well, we need to start asking the world to do business in RMB, which is the renminbi, which is the Chinese currency. And they said to the world leaders of the, it seems to be BRIC economies, the large, Brazil, India, Russia, etc. And they said, hey, can you start doing trade with us in our renminbi? And they said, well, I don't know. I like kind of doing it in the US dollars. We know what we're getting. We know what's happening. They said, yes, but you can see what happens. They can take this away from you too. And they said, okay, well, what's in it for us? Like what really backs the renminbi? What makes that currency better than the USD? And it's a fair question. And China said, well, we are the world's leading manufacturer. We manufacture all the goods. We're a very strong economy and country. That should be enough. And they said, well, that's not enough, because we saw what happened in the United States or to Russia, and they froze those assets. So what prevents you guys freezing the renminbi currency or the assets, the bonds of your country when we have conflict? And great question. And China said, well, you make a fair point. So what if we enabled you to actually exchange our currency for gold? Would that help? And they said, yes, that would help a lot. And they asked another question. They said, well, whereabouts would this be stored? They said, well, it'd be stored in China. I said, I don't know if that's a good place to store it if we need it. You own it in China. And there was some apprehension because currencies are really built around belief and trust. And if there's not a lot of trust in it, it's not going to work, which is why the USD has been the reserve currency for so long, is because there's a lot of trust in it and a lot of belief in it. So China says, well, that's a fair point. What if we were to create some sort of independent vault or system or effectively some sort of marketplace where there was verified gold stores that were not held by us, but held by effectively like an international body. And every time there was verification, someone would go and verify the exact gold stores in there, and we could create some sort of exchange where you can start to price it across the 200-day moving average. So it gives more price stability to gold. And then would you do more trade with us? And they said, yes, we would do that. So they kind of set up this Shanghai Gold Index, which has allowed China now to do more trade with some of these countries. And there's now, it used to be that was like 2% of all global trade was done in the renminbi, the Chinese currency. But now it's clicked up to about 4%. So they've doubled the amount of global trade because they've now got a currency that's backed by gold, okay? Now, what's happened because of that is the world's cotton onto that, and the US has also cotton onto it, and they thought, well, we can see what's happening here. China has about 2,300 tons of gold, right? And the US has about 8,800 or 8,000 tons of gold. So the US is still, by and large, by far, the country that has the most gold reserves. But China's starting to buy a lot of gold up because of this new trade deal that they've got with other BRIC economies. So that's why you're seeing one of the reasons why you've seen a huge spike in the price of gold against the USD is because China's a ravenous beast buying up all of this gold. And it's well known in financial circles that China's doing this. It's well known by the US. And of course, the US says, well, why are we going to let that happen? Why don't we start buying and developing our own gold stores again as well? So there's now a really high demand from China and the US on gold because they feel like the person with the most gold will get to decide what currency is traded in the world. Now, that's fine. However, just because a country has gold stores doesn't mean that it's going to be used as the reserve currency, because a lot of people mistakenly think that we should be back on a gold standard. And you see this everywhere, especially with the Bitcoiners and the crypto freaks and the debasement crew, like the world's going to be debased currency, we're all going to die, that crew. The gold spruikers and the Bitcoiners, yeah? And they have to have this story to make sure people keep buying their assets, because the only way both of those go up in value is if more people buy them. That's why they get so vehemently pissed off when you question it, because they know if no one continues to buy either gold or Bitcoin, the price can't continue to go up because it's a greater full asset. It's only worth what a greater fool's pay for it the next day because it doesn't produce anything, okay? And again, if you want to go and check out the multiple episodes I've done on this, go back and check out the show that I did with Matt Brazer and on Bitcoin. We had a debate, and also the other episodes I've done on gold. So we can't, whilst China's looking to have gold as the backing to increase global trade, we can't really go back to a gold standard. So here's what happened to the gold standard. In 1971, August 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon takes the US economy off the gold standard, which means now the currency is backed by nothing than belief and trust in the US economy. Okay, now by the way, the US economy is very rich, produces trillions in GDP. It's got independent judicial body, legislature. Like it's the world's leading economy. So it is backed by the economy and the might of the US military. It's not backed by nothing. Okay, and so they've gone off the dollar. Now the reason they did that is because when countries trade with each other, the terms of trade changed based on the fluctuation of the currency. So, for example, the reason why being off the gold standard is effective for trade is because if a country goes through some challenging economic times, the value of their currency will fall. Now, if that happens, or when that happens, it improves their terms of trade, which means if they're importing goods from overseas with higher valued currencies, they're basically importing the value of the currency back into their country. And what will happen is the value of their currency will go back up. So it does help a country to get back on its feet when we have a fiat currency system. Whereas if you have a gold standard and a country goes through some challenging times, they can't balance the terms of trade and they cannot get back on their feet. And there's a great example of what happened to the United States in the 30s when the stock market collapsed in 1929, went through a Great Depression. The Federal Reserve could not influence interest rates down to increase liquidity to save the economy because they were trying to prevent a run on gold because it was attached to the gold standard. So the gold standard contributed mostly to the Great Depression. So you can't really say we can go back on the gold standard because we need to be able to influence the liquidity of currency in the marketplace when things like that happen. So a great example of when it worked well was in 2008 when all the idiot bankers decided to trade pieces of shit with each other, which are mortgage bonds that weren't worth anything, like idiots. The whole banking system collapsed and the Federal Reserve stepped forward and said, hey, we can provide liquidity and credit to the system to keep the system running. And that's exactly what happened. And it saved the global economy from another depression. So you can see that being on a gold standard is not actually the best thing for an economy. And so I think China is saying, hey, we want to utilize gold, not as a gold standard for our currency, but we want to have our currency backed by something so people use it more for global trade. And the reason why they want that is because they want to be the global trading leader. And they want to effectively prevent the United States from having any leverage over them in the USD currency, like what happened to Russia. So if there's any conflict, China is not at the mercy of the United States, with the United States standing on its neck. That's kind of, it wants to decouple from the United States' power. That's what it wants. So it has to use gold to do that to some extent to show the trading partners that it has some value. But at the end of the day, just so you know, we can't move back onto a gold standard. So all these gold bugs and Bitcoiners go, we have the currency not backed by anything. They don't realize that a deflationary currency causes depressions. It causes an economy to collapse. Case in point, in 1815, after the Napoleonic Wars in Britain, the British went back onto a gold standard. And because the currency was then deflationary, meaning the currency was actually growing in value, people stopped spending money. The reason why people spend money is because inflation's at 2%. They know it's going to be worth less next year. That's why they want to spend it. And spending creates the economy. So if you have a deflationary asset, because a currency is backed by gold, for example, you're going to have exactly what happened in Britain in 1815. The economy fell by 50%. It went into a huge recession. So they got back off the gold standard. So the gold standard were like training wheels on an economy. When a country grows, and by it was like 1950 in the United States to 1960, the US economy grew from producing 300 billion a year in GDP to something like $1 trillion in like a 10-year period. And so it tripled in value. And then from there to I think it was 1990, so 30-year period, it went up by a factor of 6x. So it went from producing 1 trillion in GDP to 6 trillion. So that's a massive growth. And the only way that was possible was to come off the gold standard in 1971. Because if a country is doing well and producing a lot, it needs more currency in the system because there's more goods and services being sold. So there should be an expansion of the M1 money supply. There should be, because it's bigger. Now, if you have it attached to gold, there can't be a supply of money grow as fast as the economy. So it actually stifles growth. And that's why they took it off the gold standard. So the US could spring its legs and run and grow, which is what it did. So it wasn't such a bad thing. And it's not such a bad thing we're off it. Where it becomes a problem is if the Federal Reserve starts to take advantage of that and start to print way too much than we need, which is kind of what happened in COVID. And so people got a whiff of like, the Federal Reserve and the RBA, they can print a bit more than what they should, because if they've got a lot of debt, they want to print away inflation. And sadly, it's actually rewarded people who have shitty money habits. Just quickly, if you're ready to take control of your finances but feel stuck on where to start, I have a solution. My book, Money Buys Happiness, simplifies investing and wealth building with practical steps to help you achieve financial peace. Get your copy via the link in the show notes and let's get your money working for you. Now back to the episode. So inflation has rewarded people with way too much debt. It's rewarded them because if you go and borrow $1 million to buy a house and inflation goes up because they're printing too much of it, the money, then you're going to be rewarded by the fact that your mortgage is going to be cut in half because it's not worth $1 million anymore. It's worth a lot less. So it actually helps and rewards poor money management. And it's rewarding the Federal Reserve right now because it's got $38 trillion in government debt. They're trying to inflate that away themselves, and this is where it can get tricky. And this is what's caused a lot of fear around the debasement of currencies. Now, will the USD keep doing that? I don't think so. They're going to have to deal with the debt somehow. It seems to me like tariffs will help reduce that. They definitely know it's a problem. I don't know how it's going to evolve. I don't know whether bonds may go up in yield so far that people just go, wow, that's a really good deal. I'm going to go and buy US Treasury bonds. And all of a sudden, the value of the currency goes back up. That's probably more what's going to happen. In which case, the US is going to have a few issues. However, getting back to the China story, China's objective is to move away from America. How they're doing it is they're using gold as the reserve or backing of their currency because all they want is for the world to use the RMB more for trade. That's really what's going on because it wants to be the world leader and it wants to have their currency as the reserve currency. Because once your currency is a reserve currency, you can then print, you can have better terms of trade. They will grow a lot faster having the reserve currency. So it gives you a tremendous amount of power. Will it happen? Will it happen? It doesn't seem like it's going to happen very soon. China's got 2,300 tons worth of gold. US has got almost 4 times as much. They're not going to roll over and take it sleeping. They know what's happening. They're going to fight back. And the US dollar has tremendous network effects. Like, it's so much easier to do trade in US dollars. That's why 60% of the world's trade is in USD. It owns 60% of the market share. You don't just topple 60% of market share in a year. It could take 100 years, in which case we're dead. Dead. D-E-D. Dead. If you put in the comments it's spelled D-E-A-D, you can get banned. So I really don't think you should worry too much about this, what's happening with China. I think more than anything, it's just a story of fear and a story of demand that's causing gold prices to go up. But I've mentioned on this show before that gold prices can also fall by 50 or 60% in a 2-year period. So it's not a marketplace I want to play in. But I hopefully give you some data, some intelligence around why the gold price is going up and why China is doing this. And hopefully also gives you an indication that it's actually not going to happen very quickly, that the US dollar is still going to be the world reserve currency. And I can assure you that it's not going to be toppled very fast and they're not going to take it rolling over. And if I see Warren Buffett, for example, they just brought out Berkshire Hathaway, which is his company. It's $1 trillion company that he's a major shareholder of. They have $380 billion in treasury bonds. They own more treasury bonds now than the Federal Reserve. And Warren Buffett's the greatest money manager of all time. So if he's buying treasury bonds, I'm fairly certain he knows that it's going to continue to be the reserve currency and we're going to not have our RMB reserve currency. So if you see the things pop up on Instagram about the BRICS economies coming together with they're going to create a new world currency and blah, 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 it's just not going to happen. And you can say in the comments whether it is or not. And of course, those that say it is, they usually buying gold or Bitcoin. They need you to believe in their bullshit story. So fine. But it's just not going to happen. Like, not in our lifetime. Even if it does, it's more likely that the euro becomes a reserve currency before RMB. And then RMB might. In which case, it doesn't really matter because the Holland used to have the reserve currency. Then it went to the British pound. The British pound used to be the global reserve currency. Does it still exist? Yes. Can you still do trade? Yes. Can you still spend it? Yes. It's still there. It doesn't mean that if the US loses reserve currency that we're all going to die. It doesn't matter which one it is. It could be RMB, it could be US dollar, it's going to move and shake. Is it going to happen quickly? No. Is it going to happen over a long period of time? Maybe. Will we be here? No, we'll be dead. So I just don't think you have to worry when you see this stuff pop up on Instagram. Oh my God, what's going to happen? You've got enough to worry about in your own personal finances to be worrying about what's happening with the RMB and the gold reserves. Let me tell you, it's more important that you're investing your time and money into skills, into businesses that produce more money, and into good quality, dare I say it, property at the right prices also works. But making intelligent personal finance decisions is way more important for you, I'm sure, than what China's doing with the gold and trying to topple the US. But that's where it started. That's why it happened. I think it was a huge mistake. The US did that, but now they're paying the consequences. And we'll see it unfold. But again, not something you have to worry about. Hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, click the button, share it with a friend. Leave me a comment below. What do you think? What do you think about what's happening with China? Will they topple the USD? Will they become the world reserve currency? I'd love to know what you think. Pop in the comments below. And of course, go check out the other episodes, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Money Grows on Trees podcast. Thanks for listening to Money Grows on Trees. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube so you never miss an episode. And if you're serious about building wealth, make sure to check out the links in the show notes and follow me on all social media platforms at Lloyd James Ross for more. See you in the next episode.